The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everybody to our last office hour for 2018. My name is Anna Maria Kroner and I head up marketing here at SPRO, and today we're talking about Employee Central. I'm very pleased to have Jean-Philippe and Jamie Boland from our team with me today. They're going to kick off the introduction a little bit later, but first I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So first, before we get into the meaty part where you can ask your questions, JP and Jamie have prepared a presentation to answer all the questions that have been submitted before. But obviously, feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar by just submitting them in the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. Now, if you can't keep up with your notes, don't worry about it. We will send you the slides and the recording after the session. And lastly, please take a couple of minutes and answer the survey at the end of the webinar. We're always trying to improve the sessions, and office hours is still a new project for us. So please let us know what you think about it. And yeah, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to JP and Jamie.
Okay, so it's this is Jamie. I'm gonna start here. Start first. So what we're gonna get in today first, we'll do a bit of an introduction to who JP and I are, and then we'll jump into an EC overview. And the reason why we're gonna do that is we're gonna make sure that everybody, there'll definitely be different levels of Employee Central knowledge within the webinar today, and we'll make sure to try and baseline everyone so everyone has a a decent understanding of what EC is and what EC can provide to your organization. And then finally we'll get into the meaty part, which is going through content that we've created to try and answer all the different questions that we've collected, and then also provide answers as questions arise in the chat, and have a little bit of time at the end to answer additional questions as well. Okay, so JP, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jamie. So this is Jean-Philippe Tremblay. You can all call me JP. Most people do. I'm the practice director for Employee Central and Payroll at SPRO. I've been working in SAP and SuccessFactors for about 10 years now. So essentially started off as an SAP HCM consultant, and eventually, kind of recycled, if you will, some of those skills into SuccessFactors, and now I've been doing that for the last, 4 to 5 years or so. My home base is Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So I know many. I saw many of the invitees for this webinar. I know many of you, and for those that I haven't spoken to in a while and from previous projects and so on, hello to all of you. It's a pleasure to see you all, and for those that I don't know, I hope to get to know you guys in the near future. So I'll pass it off to Jamie so he can say a bit about himself.
Thanks. My name is Jamie Boland. I'm the Senior Director of Enterprise Services at SPRO. I've been working with SAP and SuccessFactors for solutions for about 14 years, 10 of those being with SPRO itself, and it's similar background to JP, working on SAP HCM on-premise, for about I'd say about 10, for about 10 years of that, and then the last 4 or 5 years transitioning to SuccessFactors Cloud, specifically around Employee Central. My home base is in Halifax, Nova Scotia, so East Coast Canada, and I'm happy to actually have this session. It's really I'm glad we're actually heading this initiative, and I'm looking forward to be part of many more of these. So JP, you want to go to the next slide? So first we'll start with an EC overview. Just to baseline everyone about Employee Central itself, what it actually does, and what can it do for your organization. So Employee Central is basically SuccessFactors' human resource information system, which will basically allow your organization to facilitate your HR processes, like your hires, terminations, transfers, promotions, those types of things. And it also allows you to define things such as your organizational structures, So how your company actually looks, the different your business units, how it's structured, your business units, your divisions, your departments, the different types of locations you have within your organization. And also allows you to define your job structure. So define the types of jobs that different employees perform within your organization, and also define your pay structures, which is how how your employees are paid and how that is structured in your organization as well. So in addition to that, speaking about the processes themselves, the different processes you can you can perform would be things like hires, retires, promotions, like I said before. From an Employee Central perspective, this is the type of thing we call events and event reasons. So events being the type of event you're doing, which could be an example of a hiring a new employee into the organization, but you may have different reasons for doing that, which could be a new position was approved or some other type of reason. So, and then on top of that, as we see at the top, within Employee Central itself, we have the availability to make sure that we have the appropriate approval processes, which is facilitated by workflow for these types of transactions that happen, on employees within the organization, making sure that the appropriate parties are involved and well informed about different types of employee master data changes or actual organizational structure changes that are happening within the organization. So if we look a little bit, if we get into the next slide, we talk about some kind of optional additions that are part of Employee Central. We have something called position management, which we say it's optional, but in a sense, most organizations will use position management to some extent. So the difference between a position and a job, would be a job is something that describes, the type of work an employee is doing for an organization, and a position is actually the seat that an employee sits in, which means that the job would be the type of information that describes a position within the organization. And what's good about position management, and the reason why most organizations use it is it actually allows you to, manage vacancies within the organization, knowing where there's vacant positions and where there's positions that have to be filled, so that to know when it needs to integrate with the recruitment process, for example. And it also allows us to store additional information about the type type of work or a different information about where an employee sits in the organization, and it facilitates an easier way of master data maintenance, so that we can push information that is stored against a position, different attributes, down to an employee who has been assigned to that position, so that things don't have to be rekeyed all the time when it comes to employee master data maintenance. And then we talk about a little bit about time off. Time off would be, it is optional to some extent. This is more about leave of absences, things like vacations, sick or long-term leave of absences, such as short-term, not short-term illnesses, but long-term leave of absence, like long-term disability. So this is a kind of a sub-module of Employee Central that allows you to facilitate those types of absence, an employee submitting an absence and a manager approving vacation, all the way from your administrators entering maternity leaves or long-term disability, putting employees on long-term disability when that needs to happen. So we can go to the next slide. So when it comes to Employee Central, one of the things that we have to one of the things that's really good to understand is that SuccessFactors is a very flexible solution overall, which means that there's a concept of allowing customers to implement whatever module they want at any time, which means that to do that, and even without Employee Central implemented, for example. So what that actually allows us, how SuccessFactors takes care of that, is they have something called an employee profile, which we see where you can have some basic personal information, which is created for against an employee, which at that point we call them users. And what that actually does is it allows organizations to implement things such as performance management, goals management, succession, or other modules by just having this type of information in place. So usually what happens is these types of deployments, these types of SuccessFactors deployments means that the data feeding into that profile is usually fed by another HRIS system, which is not Employee Central. But when Employee Central is in play and is implemented or being implemented, the data within the employee profile is actually fed from Employee Central. And what happens here is that depending on the module that the additional module that you are actually implementing on the, whether it's a talent on the talent side of things with performance management or succession, or if you're talking about compensation or recruitment, Employee Central and the employee profile will integrate back and forth when it needs to with these modules to facilitate different types of processes. And I go to the next slide. So just to get a little bit into it, so foundation objects within Employee Central, outside, employee data is employee data. So, from an Employee Central perspective, it allows you to track, any type of personal information or employment information for an employee, which is mainly the information about the, the job that the employee does for the organization, as well as where they sit. But how that's facilitated, and the reason why we can actually do that is because we initially have to set up these types of foundation objects, and these foundation objects in Employee Central are separated by something we call organizational structures, which is your things such as your legal entities or companies, business units, divisions, departments, which is different operating groups within the organization, locations, and cost centers, which is how these operating groups are funded. The next thing is job structures. So we touched a little bit on that. We have something called a job code, which is what describes the type of work that an employee does, and something called a job function, which is really just a way of actually grouping job codes together into a group. For example, you could have all your IT jobs could be in an IT job function, and that can help with reporting needs or some other talent management needs as well. Then we have other objects that take care of our pay structures. So things that describe how an employee gets paid, depending on where they, depending on the type of, pay grade that they're in or pay scale, what's their range of pay that they're allowed based on the scale that they're in, and based on the seniority they have in the within the organization. And then that's what describes how they're paid, and then how they're actually paid is through objects called pay components, which would be similar to wage types for anybody here who's familiar with the SAP on-premise terms as well. So this describes how employees are paid, when they're paid, and the different types of frequencies that they're paid as well as the pay calendars. So we can go to the next slide. So really, in the end, when it comes to organizational structures, just to give a bit of extra information, is that when we perform Employee Central projects, one of the biggest challenges that we do have is how do we take this type of these types of organizational structure objects. So we have legal entities, business units, divisions, departments, locations, and cost centers. And how do we make that reflect the organization, that you have? Because in most cases, what we notice in our implementations is that, not every company, operates with the notion of business units. Not every company operates with the notion of divisions. Every company has kind of their own flavor of how they manage their organizational structure. So that's something that we always have to, that's something to always think about is, if these types of things can be kind of laid out, laid out ahead of time before jumping into an Employee Central project, it'll be easy for the partner to take that information and kind of see how it can fit within the Employee Central system and the Employee Central organizational structure objects. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so one of the biggest, I'll say, questions within that we've collected is there was many questions about global implementations and lessons learned. So really just to describe what this actually means. So we have organizations who run globally, and definitely the different types, the approach that we do not want to take with these types of implementations is to start from scratch every time you would move to a different country, for example, when implementing Employee Central. So the things that that should be really discussed ahead of time globally from an organization is everything that we see here on the left-hand side, which is called global template. The global template is that it's different pieces of the implementation or initiative, I would say, when transitioning to Employee Central. that should be at least discussed ahead of time to get an idea of where the organization sits for these different categories, to see which areas can definitely can be designed with a global flavor versus a localized flavor. So things such as business processes, different business processes that get executed in HR, such as trying to harmonize the hiring process, trying to harmonize the transfer process, trying to harmonize those different types of things, so that it can be easier when kind of rolling out different countries with Employee Central. Because most of these implementations would not necessarily happen in a big bang approach. They would happen where either a pocket of countries or it would be deployed out in a kind of a per country basis. The next thing we have here is Employee Central Configuration Workbook. So that's another thing that we have, which is this is the documentation that this is a mandatory documentation requirement for SuccessFactors when deploying Employee Central, and we have to make sure that managing these types of workbooks is something how that's managed needs to be talked about globally to make sure that it's during because you may have different projects for different countries potentially going at the same time. For example, you may have locations in Canada, locations in the US, or locations overseas happening at the same time. We want to make sure that that these workbooks, because they would be one set of workbooks for the entire implementation globally, want to make sure that these workbooks are managed and everybody manage and making sure that everyone understands what's in them and what they're approving and things like that. Also, master data governance, same idea as when, it kind of goes with the business processes, making sure that the master data governance and processes are being managed globally in the organization. So the roles about, who is allowed to change what type of data and things like that. So when it comes to permissions, when it comes to configuration itself, we want to make sure that we deal with global configuration naming conventions. So within the system itself, you want to try and be a little bit clever about how we name different objects in the system so that things can be expanded globally. So making sure that we think about that ahead of time so that the system doesn't, things are easily found in the system. Training material is a huge thing. Training itself should be something that's thought about at a high level, at a global template level, making sure that the training that's delivered is consistent globally. Global RICEFW design decisions. This is an interesting one. So RICEF actually, RICEF is actually a term that we've used, back in the SAP on-premise world, which is really, it stands for reports, interfaces, conversions, enhancements, and forms. And what this actually does is these are different, I'll say, non-configuration type of things that we have to do during an implementation. And when we are building these types of, I'll say, enhancements or add-ons to the system, we want to make sure that we design these things with a global flavor, making sure that we're not building something specifically for a localization or a specific country, unless we truly have to. We just want to make sure we limit those types of things because it actually, it definitely creates a lot of extra work, and you want to avoid the idea of re-implementing the system fresh for every country that you're deploying for. Talent management refactoring also, just because you're implementing Employee Central doesn't mean that your talent management processes shouldn't be aligned either. They kind of go hand in hand, given the fact that Employee Central itself will feed and will interact with these other processes and modules like talent management, such as performance, succession, and things like that. So you want to make sure that those processes are also aligned, because just because we align Employee Central, it doesn't mean that we can, and then the talent side is not aligned as well globally. It can cause challenges to actually, for us to stick to a global template approach when it comes to implementing Employee Central. Just to jump a bit, I think we've discussed the last two, the design decisions and the master data conversion. Local configurations, things that we've seen in our global implementations that are always usually localized. So, time management is something that, every country usually will have their own flavor of time management, which is handled, handled locally. Doesn't mean that you can't put a type of global solution there, but there'll always be kind of rules and regulations that need to happen in the local, such as payroll integrations as well. Benefits and pension, it's another thing that's always usually handled with local configuration. because there's different pension means many different things when you're talking about global and different countries. Translations is obviously a global thing with all the different languages around the world that you have to translate the system to so that it's supported for. Also making sure that we don't making sure that when it comes to the business processes, we have to make sure that if there are variations, because there will be, these global templates will not be perfect most of the time, and there will be variations from these template processes, just to make sure that we handle those. I'll say with care, just to make sure that we're not kind of reinventing the wheel. And but the idea at the end of the day is to make sure that we try and implement these processes at a global level if possible to keep the global template intact at all costs. So you can go to the next slide, please. So here, if we just look back at the diagram that we've had before, this kind of just shows like everything highlighted in red here is where things that are usually majorly affected by a global implementation. So foundation objects, when you talk about your org structures, you talk about your job structures and your pay structures, these are things that are usually, these are discussion points that always have to happen, and if they can happen ahead of time, it would be a good thing, before proceeding with a global implementation. You want to make sure that because these are the foundation objects of the system, and they need to be harmonized with with everything when it comes from an employee data perspective. We want to make sure that your org structures, org structure for sure needs to be aligned, so that how the organization is structured from a business unit, division, department perspective. Job structures is something that it's definitely good if it can be. It's definitely not. It doesn't have to be, but it's good if it can be aligned globally. It'll make it easier. It'll make it easier down the road, especially when it comes from a recruitment perspective. And your pay structures is another thing that it definitely is something that it's kind of a nice to have if they can be aligned globally. But most of the ones that we've seen, the pay structures are usually something that every country will have their flavor of how employees are paid, and it's different by location and things like that. The other discussion that should happen is approvals. Approvals is a big thing that you can get into a big mess with the system when if you're having to create a whole bunch of a new set of workflow and approval processes for different locations or different countries when you're doing a global implementation. It's nice to, it's okay to have some variations, obviously, and there will be some definitely, but making sure that there's that solid baseline that takes care of the 90% rule. When it comes to your HR processes and the workflows that support those, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the event and event reasons that we discussed earlier. The place that you see in the middle here, when it comes to the different types of personal information and job and employment information that we maintain within the Employee Central system. Why this is not highlighted is because 9 times out of 10, all of these areas of the system have country-specific areas, which means that if I'm a user logged in from Canada, or a user logged in from the United States, this type of information is only shown if I'm it's only shown to those users, or it's only maintained against those employees. Sorry, if based on the location that they're in. So these are things that are easily you can deal with these things easily when you're doing global implementations, because the system is built to do that. But it's the areas highlighted in red that are kind of the ones that are. It's good to have the discussions ahead of time to make sure that as it'll make it easier during the project and during the workshops of the project, if the information about what's going to be global versus local is known ahead of time. So I think the next slide, JB. Okay, this is just a little bit more information about the global implementations. It's very important when you do this that the governance of the project itself is very tight. I won't go through every line here, but it's good that all the key stakeholders need to be aligned with the idea of a global template, and everyone that we have a strong process in place which protects the global template. Usually there should be a central team, a central design decision, like a design decision team to review every design decision that has to be made, making sure that if there's a requirement coming from our Australia project versus a design coming from our Canadian side of the project, we want to make sure that make sure that the global template itself does not, is thought about when these decisions are made, so that as you go through and you start rolling out multiple countries during the global rollout, the system is each country is aligned to the global template as much as possible. 85–90%, and then the rest of the rest of the implementation can be taken care of with some localized configuration. So if we jump down to the bottom, actually just one more thing, if you want to go back, JP, for back to one slide here. Yeah, so just to jump in here, just to reiterate, so the different items within the system itself when it comes to global template, business processes, those should be harmonized, and the different HR transactions that you can have, and global employee data needs to be harmonized for the global template. User roles and access, the hope is to align that, but that's always a struggle. Because the access requirements for employee data and things like that usually change from country to country. So you always go in there with the good intentions, but doesn't mean you're going to come out with exactly a global template for role-based permissions. Workflows and notifications are also a piece that we need to make sure that are aligned. Organizational structure, as we talked about earlier, job codes and pay structures are definitely it's a nice to have. That those would be aligned, but again, there's always a struggle with having those discussions of how you can align those across the global company. And I think that's good for that one, JP. Okay, so there was a couple of questions about reporting, just what the reporting options were for Employee Central, and a little bit about data load discussion. So when we say data load, I'll just touch a little bit on data load at first. So when we talk about data load, what we actually mean here is how do we convert our, the data we have in our current system to Employee Central. So the only point I want to make about data loads, which I feel is very important, is that it isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. So SuccessFactors provides you different file templates to be able to upload your data from a data conversion standpoint from your legacy system to Employee Central. So that works well. The part that's always a discussion point for customers is, how do we get the data out of our old system? How do we massage that data? What type of procedure? What do we want to use a kind of a software to be able to extract that and massage the data, or do we want to, do we want to actually extract data manually, do our own massaging, so people, in Excel spreadsheets and taking care of these types of things. For me, I haven't really seen there isn't like a one-size-fits-all solution to be able to do this effectively. It kind of all depends on I think the resources you have within the organization, how comfortable they are with the data. I've seen some companies try the process of using a software to be able to extract and transform data, and another company doing it more manual. I'll say the brute force approach, where they're taking data dumps from their legacy system, doing Excel spreadsheet lookups and things like that, and uploading the data. And I've in some companies I've seen it more effective with the brute force approach. So it's one of those things that I think you just have to take a temperature check on, on the resources, see who's comfortable with extracting this data, reviewing the templates, understanding what needs to be provided, and seeing how quickly that actually can be done and how comfortable the resources are with it. But for the most part, I think most of the customers that we've dealt with have done it using more of the brute force approach versus using a software or a more automated type of solution for the initial data conversion. JP, did you have anything to add on that one, on the data load?
No, I mean that's very, very true what you say about sometimes the most effective way is to use the tools that you're more comfortable with, or you're more efficient at using. Sometimes, even though there's tools provided, the setup required and the learning curve may be longer to kind of conquer than just doing it with tools that you're comfortable with. And I would add that within the solution itself, we talk about data loads in terms of one-time loads for data migration, let's say for a project, for example. But there are also a lot of tools within the solution itself that allow you to make mass changes that don't necessarily require extracting any data, that are often in the solution itself. you know, and can serve as really important accelerators when you're dealing with reorgs and you know, those types of kind of the daily or the monthly you know, work that an HR person might have to do. So it's important to always consider that, but 100% agree with the you know, the comfort level is what we need, and sometimes that's the best accelerator.
Yep, no, for sure. So we had some questions about reporting solutions. So what's available for Employee Central? So in Employee Central, there's there's these different different streams here of different types of reporting, and they all mean for the most part they all have their different ups and downs. From a in Employee Central, you have the most basic, which is kind of list reporting, which is ad hoc reporting. So it's a tool where you can go in, you can drag and drop columns from the different portlets within Employee Central. So from you can kind of amalgamate personal data, employment information, and things like that into one report. You can't really do any transformation of the data here, so that's kind of the limitation there. And there are some things that you can do, is you can't really read much configuration data. You can't read any some of the supporting information. A lot of the times you can't bring that in, and you also can't do any calculations on the data and with calculated columns or anything like that. So it's a very basic tool. It is effective. I mean, it works well, especially when you're doing validations for data migration, making sure that the data that went into the system is what you expected and things like that. So that's where we've seen it being most used. The next is dashboards and tiles. Honestly, from an Employee Central perspective, I haven't seen this used heavily. The functionality is there, so you can make tiles for different users across the organization to show specific statistics or pieces of data that they may want to view on their homepage. Daily or weekly or things like that. From an Employee Central perspective, haven't seen it used that much, but the functionality is available. This is probably the most, I'd say the most important and most attractive one is Online Report Designer and EC Advanced Reporting. So this is a tool that pretty much I would call it the ad hoc reporting on steroids. This is a tool that is able to link to pretty much any piece of data within the Employee Central system, whether it be configuration data, employee master data, and it can provide all the list reporting that ad hoc would provide. On top of that, it can provide graphs. You can create graphs and charts from this data. You can do aggregated columns. You can schedule reports to be sent to certain people within the organization, weekly, daily, things like that. And you're also able to export this data into a multitude of different formats. And in addition, you're able to actually have logic within your report, so you're able to do calculated columns and different types of those different types of things. What's also, this is something that needs to be it needs to be activated. From what I understand, at this point there is no additional cost for this, but something that's is definitely very useful and something that should be highly considered when doing EC implementations. Workforce analytics, which would be more about it'd be more like statistical reporting for for large amounts of data kind of over time. So we have you're able to look at different trends within the organization over a long period, 5 to 7 year or more period, as long as the data is in there to support it. So you can look at turnover rates and all that, turnover rates, how many hires we've had at certain periods of time, any type of any type of information like that. So it's more of like a business intelligence type of solution. So you're able to it has a very similar feel to the Online Report Designer and based on the reports that it outputs, but it's just that the calculation of data it's less about the operational reporting and more about the statistical and strategic reporting when it comes to your employee master data. So this year just talks a little bit more about EC Advanced Reporting. So it's very it is really the Online Report Designer itself. But in addition, what it does is it provides some special features for EC. So some special columns that have specific calculations when it comes to HR data, as well as there is content provided by SAP. There's about 70 reports available, some international reports and country specific that's already been created. So what's good about this is that you can upload these 70 reports into your system, and you can use them as face value if they're okay, but at the same time you can take them, copy them, and kind of tailor them to your needs as well with the EC Advanced Reporting tool. So that's what makes it very powerful as well. Okay, so JP.
All right, thanks, Jamie. So we had one question about the roadmap for time and attendance in EC, and I think that here I need to give a little bit of context just in terms of roadmap information in general, and in terms of time and attendance, I'll do my best to kind of give you our perspective on where things are going. So what can we really say? So the first thing that we have to understand is that in SuccessFactors and in Employee Central specifically, there's a module called Time Off, which Jamie spoke about, which is really all the accrual rules, leave requests, and leave of absence functionality, right? So and that's kind of its own entity, if you will. And on top of that, there's another module called Payroll Timesheet. And essentially, Payroll Timesheet is exactly what it sounds like. It's really a timesheet time capture tool. To enter, you enter your time, and it does a fair bit in terms of calculations for the generation of gross payroll. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to understand about this. So one thing is that I can tell you that in every release that I've seen and that we look at the releases every quarter. I've really seen a trend where there seems to be a lot of functionality being added to the payroll timesheet every release. Okay, so there's definitely something going on in that sense. The depth of the functionality, it's getting deeper and deeper, and you can tell that it's trying to address whatever gaps that customers have provided. So you can tell that the tool is becoming more and more robust. However, SAP's position, and I mean, I've been on sales cycles with SAP. we answer RFPs all the time. We go through these discussions with customers, and SAP's position on this particular tool is that they aim it really at the mid-market or companies with, between quotes, simple requirements, because really there's nothing simple when it comes to time management. I'm sure as many of you know, so it's relative. But the only way to know if the payroll timesheet tool is something that you could use in your organization is to have a very thorough analysis of your requirements and to do a fit gap analysis against what it actually does. I mean, or let SAP do that for you. But essentially, this tool doesn't cost you any more licenses. So there's a lot of upside here if it could run, if it could be used in your company, because it doesn't, it costs you, yes, implementation costs and so on, but it wouldn't cost you any more licenses. So there's an advantage there. But again, it's not aimed at large enterprise. And rather, I prefer to say it's not aimed at companies with very complex time management requirements. So if you are in a highly unionized, environment, and you've got, 30 collective bargaining agreements to deal with, and you've got a lot of specific rules for time management, it's very possible that SAP's recommendation to you would be to use, and frankly, at this point, I have to kind of agree, you would have to use some sort of third-party time and attendance systems. That's all time attendance system. So that's always been SAP's position, and I think it does make sense, at least for the moment, given that. So the types of third-party systems that you'd be looking at here would be something like Workforce Software. So they call it SAP Time and Attendance by Workforce Software. So it's a partner company, and or Kronos or something like that, right? So a lot of the push here that we see with regards to time management, even though Payroll Timesheet has a lot being released, and then we see a lot of new functionality, I think that it's likely that some large complex requirement you would encounter gaps, and you would have to look at, can we put in workarounds? Are these workarounds palatable to the business? And then maybe you make your decisions that way. But it's not. So like I said, the position for now, and there's a lot coming. But again, it's not aimed at large enterprise for the most part. The other thing I wanted to say is just a comment about the role of partners and customers and SAP with regards to roadmap information. So what you see here, so I'm not going to go through all of these items, so don't worry. I just wanted to show you this is just one slide from the latest roadmap document I could get my hands on. This is from September or something like that. So you can see that this goes to Q2 2018. The most important piece of information on here is in the bottom right corner, where it says that this is the current state of planning and may be changed by SAP at any time. So just like customers, partners like us, like implementers like us, we are just subject to the same uncertainty there as customers. So we're a little bit in the same boat here. There's nothing confidential or whatever internal in what I'm showing you. This is a document that we will send you after I'll send you the source document after the presentation, so that you can take a look at what's coming, at least on the roadmap, at least up to 2018. But there's a couple points I want to make. One, you kind of need a little bit of context before you can, this information will mean anything to you. So I'll give you one example. If you look at, under recent innovations over here, if you look at redesign display of available balance, well, you kind of have to know what the original display was like to understand what kind of improvement is being brought to it. So you need a lot of context to kind of understand these roadmap documents. So you kind of have to have been either implemented something, or you use it, or you're using it currently. So to get a sense for, sometimes what do these things actually mean in practice. But in essence, this documentation is available to customers. This is, in fact, the document I have here. It says customer right on the bottom left corner here, right on the front page. So this is available to you, and if you're looking for a link to this, your SAP reps can point you in the right direction. For partners, we get it from our own kind of partner sites. So, but there's an equivalent for customers, I'm sure. So we'll send you the version that this is from, just so you have something to start with, and this will give you an idea of what's coming, at least till 2018. And of course, very important, always stay up to date with the releases. As not only because obviously this changes every 3 months, right? You're going to get a documentation from SuccessFactors telling you all the new things that are coming, and and when they're going to be available to you. And oftentimes you can get a lot of value, and you can determine what you need to add to your system or how you want it to evolve. And if your staff is too overwhelmed and they don't have time to look at the release documentation, well, SPRO, as part of our sustainment services, we even offer to do this for you. So we can go through the releases with you. You essentially make it, get into an agreement with us, and we can walk you through at each release what's new and how it can be tailored to your implementation. So with that said, that's what I want to say about the roadmaps. So, keep your eyes peeled, but essentially that's about it. So moving on. Okay, so we got a couple of other questions around employee movements and onboarding, and also about on EC and onboarding integration. The questions were a little specific, so I wanted to make them maybe a little bit broader, make my answer a bit broader for everyone on the call. But essentially, I'll try to go through both questions and give you a sense for what our feelings are around them. So how does EC support employee mobility, without the recruiting module? Well, essentially EC, right? So a large part of Employee Central is transactions, and one of the big transactions that's done by HR staff, or that's initiated by managers, are employee movements. Now, some companies and some environments have, let's say a company that's very unionized but also has non-unionized staff. So in those situations, it's very possible in EC, for instance, that we could treat both groups differently in terms of employee movements. So for instance, we could permit employee movements if an employee was going from a non-unionized position to another non-unionized position, and allow for the user to input the necessary information and move the employee from one place to the other, and essentially derive a workflow from that for an approval process. But we could also add business rules within the system to put some constraints around that, to say that, okay, well, if it's an employee going from a non-union position to a union position, this isn't allowed, because maybe this requires that the job be posted and for an internal recruitment process to go on. So why is this useful? I mean, where's the value in doing this? Well, oftentimes companies either have, third-party systems that they use to collect the input from their users to say, okay, well, I need to do X, Y, Z on this employee. I want to move JP to Jamie's position, right? So sometimes there's third-party systems to do that, or maybe that's even being done with paper forms that are just being routed to HR or something like that. So now this is kind of a self-service angle to all of this, where you can now do these things in the system itself. And you can also simplify it, based on as much as possible for if managers are the ones initiating the transaction. So one example of that type of simplification would be to, like, as opposed to say SAP on-premise HCM, where when you do a promotion, you actually have to say this is a promotion. In Employee Central, you can actually derive this information. So the system will know based on the configuration, based on the data that's being changed, that this is a promotion versus a transfer versus perhaps a demotion, etc. So the way that so EC will support kind of those employee movements, and we can essentially control and enhance the standard transactions that EC would allow with business rules that we can tailor to the business requirements. That's essentially what I want you guys to remember from this standpoint. So the second question that we received is, what are the advantages of using EC if we already have recruiting and if we plan to implement onboarding? So in how would having EC like enhance this experience? So I guess for that I'll just kind of bring up another slide. So EC is like the foundation, right, for all the master data in the system. Now, of course, in many circumstances, you can have another, like Jamie was saying, SuccessFactors allows you to implement module by module. So you don't necessarily need to start with Employee Central. However, once you do have Employee Central, it does become the foundation for everything else. So why is it an advantage to have Employee Central if you've got recruitment and onboarding? And the reality is that it's because it's native integration between the modules, and it allows you to kind of have a streamlined business process. So what do I mean by that? So typically, right, I'm going to go through this process just as ideas, right? Where does it start? Well, it might start by somebody creating a position in Employee Central, right? Once there's a position created with all its attributes, then you take that position, and from that position, you create a job requisition in recruitment, where the data is being pulled from the position and inputted automatically into the requisition based on the configuration. So it's saying, okay, I'm taking all these attributes from the position and I'm moving them to the job requisition so they don't have to be re-entered, and I've got some consistency happening now in my data, right? Then that job requisition, it turns into a posting, right? So then the recruitment process starts, and essentially it goes to recruitment marketing. The job is posted maybe externally, maybe just internally, whatever it is. Then eventually somebody applies to this job, or many people, of course, and then you have a selection process. And now you select your candidate. So somebody is the selected candidate, and now you're ready to hire them. So now what happens is recruitment will send that data to onboarding. Now again, you're taking data from the application and data from the requisition, and you're pushing it to onboarding so that the employee can now go and have his pre-onboarding, access to his pre-onboarding site, fill in any documentation he needs to do, complete some information, right? So that, again, the goal is to keep the data consistent and to allow to minimize the number of data entry points, right? So the candidate has filled in all the data that he needs to fill out in onboarding, and now that data is getting sent, again, along with some other perhaps localized forms and customer-specific forms and data, back to Employee Central once they finalize their onboarding, or at least the pre-onboarding. So, in other words, once the onboarding step is reached, this data will move over to Employee Central, at which point there's a pending hire screen where somebody will go in and actually process the hire. But at that point, all the data has been defaulted from the onboarding process, and all of this started from a position in EC, and now finally, at the end, when you hire the person, they're going to go and sit in that position. So, why is this an advantage? Well, now you've got a process that's very consistent. I mean, you started in Employee Central with a position where you had some very specific characteristics. All of these characteristics kind of followed through the process, and by the end, you're hiring somebody, putting putting the person in a seat, at which point the transaction in EC, once again, defaults a lot of this data back into the employee profile. So your data is very consistent. There's no, there was less room for error, and it allows you to essentially, keep the data cleaner, which leads to, better analytics, better decision making. I mean, you name it. I mean, having good data is like drinking water. I mean, it doesn't matter, why it's good for you. Just know that it is. Like, in the end, this is what allows you to. This is the main advantage, I would say, of having everything inside the suite. Okay, so we had one last question that was provided. It was about implementing EC and how to handle benefits management. So we have a few minutes left. So Jamie, I want to leave some time for questions. Did you want to say a few words about this one?
Yeah, it's just yeah, and there was actually a question in the chat about this as well. So really, from a benefits management perspective, there's kind of two ways to look at it. One is whether whether your organization wants to insource benefits versus outsource benefits. So when you're insourcing benefits, that means you're going to you're going to take on managing the whole enrollment piece, managing how the plans are built, managing all the employee deductions and all the employer contributions that go along with all the benefits as well, and that has to be kind of managed in house and integrated within whatever payroll system that you would choose, and then your benefits provider at that point would take care of. You have to integrate a little bit with your benefits provider, and they'll take care of things like claims processing potentially, and also managing the coverage of those plans. But when you outsource, for example, to different, there are some providers that SAP kind of there's a SAP, I'll say preferred vendors when it comes to benefit outsourcing. There's EC provides a mechanism so that data is able to be integrated from an employee master data perspective to these benefit providers, these benefit service providers, and that data is, so to make sure that they have the most up-to-date information about your employees, so that eligibility to different plans can be facilitated, and when you're using an outsourcing model, everything I just spoke about when it comes to enrollment and managing the plans, things like that, that's all being taken care of by the the benefit service provider, as well as in conjunction with the actual benefits carriers themselves. So then what ends up happening in the end is that once we have that flow of data between the Employee Central and those benefit service providers, that will come into then that has to come back to whatever payroll solution you're using, so that the different employee deductions and those types of things are making sure that this type of these amounts are coming off employees' pay, and also that the integrating with your I'll say third party payment process, so that the carriers are also paid as well. So there's a mechanism of doing this, whether you decide as an organization to do in-source benefits or outsource benefits when implementing Employee Central, and also whether you're dealing with SAP solutions or non-SAP solutions when it comes to benefits or payroll as well. So that's something to that's just kind of all I want to say about that. And SAP does provide, like I said, there's kind of out-of-the-box integration to some providers that have partnered up with SAP. Some are specific for certain countries, so some for US, some for Canada only, and some are also for global. And in the end, there's always the option of if you need to, there's always the option of using a tool that that SAP provides. They provide a benefits integration template that can be used so that you can actually build your own integration to integrate employee data with any type of benefit service provider or benefit provider directly. So that's something to be aware of, that those options are available. So I think that's all I hit. Yep.
Okie dokie. There you go.
Yeah.
So Anna, take it away.
Yes. So it seems like pretty much all of the questions were answered during the course of the presentation, but we do have 3 more minutes, so I give everyone another minute to maybe submit a question if there are any. In the meantime, I just want to remind you that you can still watch any of our previous office hours. So the first session was on compensation. We had a second one on talent acquisition. And well, today's on-demand session is going to be sent out to you after. So if you do have any more questions, send me an email at marketing@anspro.com, or yeah, watch any of our previous sessions at go.anspro.com/office hours. So yeah, I don't see any more questions coming in. So like I said, if there's anything else, I'm going to send you a follow-up email with the link to the recording and the slides, and feel free to just respond if there are any more questions. So with that, Jamie, JP, thank you so much for being on the session today. I'm sure we're going to have another session on EC in the next year.
Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, some of these topics could have been probably expanded on a full session. So who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely, especially around. I know, you know, a lot of customers are. I know some of the customers that were had questions in there. I know some of them are SAP customers currently, so SAP on-premise customers. So there's definitely, that's a whole separate avenue of an office hours that we could have around that that topic for sure.
Absolutely, and you guys feel free to let us know in the post-webinar survey if there's anything specific you want to learn more about. I can definitely get Jamie or JP to do another webinar, or maybe to write a blog post on that, hint, hint. Yeah. All right, with that, thank you everybody for being on the call today, and have a great day.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.